Amendment Day, everybody. Some of you have been hearing me talk about this for the last month, every day. Thank you for your patience with that. First Amendment Day, this is our 4th annual First Amendment Day celebration. It's a holiday that I made up because I thought we needed one. The only power I have in the world is I get to decide when First Amendment Day is. So it's fun for me. First Amendment Day is organized by the UNC Center for Media Law and Policy, which is a joint project between the schools of journalism and law at UNC. And we're really fortunate today to have this interesting panel. Every day for First Amendment Day, we ask our undergraduates what First Amendment topics they're interested in. And this was the topic that I had been hearing most about in the last year and heard most about during the planning process. So we're really fortunate to have all these great panelists to talk about athletes and their social media use. Roxanne is our moderator, and she's going to be running the panel discussion, and we'll introduce everybody. All I have to do is say, Happy First Amendment Day.
So just a really quick introduction to our panelists today. All the way to the left is Paul Pogge. He's the Associate Athletic Director. Next to him is Brandon Morey. He's a senior majoring in communications, and he's also the sports editor at the Daily Tar Heel. And that's as the sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel that he is here today. Next to him is Megan Lyons, a senior majoring in business journalism, and she's also a forward on Carolina's field hockey team. So she's going to talk to us about her personal experience as a student athlete here at UNC. And right here is Barbara Osborne, who's an attorney and also an associate professor at the Department of Exercise and Sport Science. So we're going to start first off with Paul Pogge. Just if you could just tell us the general rules about social media and student athletes. As far as does the NCAA have rules, national rules for everyone, and what do you do here at UNC specifically?
Well, I think the NCAA has some uncertainty in terms of what they've asked schools to do specifically, which is probably why we're here today. And I do want to take an opportunity to thank everyone for having me here. As a representative of athletics, we view what we do as a complement to the academic enterprise here. Education is certainly a critical component of our day-to-day operations as we approach with student athletes and social media. So it's great to be here and have an opportunity to support the academic enterprise. As it pertains specifically to our approach with social media, we do translate that educational emphasis into what we do. We engage an outside company called Varsity Monitor that helps us monitor student athletes' use of social media.
Okay, and are there team policies for specific teams as well?
Yes, sir. In that coach sense.
Can you give us a couple examples off the top of your head?
I wish I could. I don't know the specific coaches' policies, and perhaps
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit on that one. I know that it varies a lot per team. There's like a set of overall guidelines, and we are all required to submit to Varsity Monitor, which is like a third-party monitor of like Facebook, Twitter, any sort of social media outlet you may have. But in addition to that, certain coaches choose to take it to like more of an extreme. For example, I know that the softball team is only allowed to have like for Facebook, for example, like 5 pictures on their Facebook, all of which have to be like a headshot and them in their uniform or some sort of picture that's approved by their coach. So that's something that the coach can put in place to make it easier to monitor for them, or just to make it just a like happy environment. I don't know, online. But like at least for us, like on the field hockey team, it's more we're given more freedom on Facebook. I guess we're not subject to those as strict guidelines, but with the understanding that like everything you're putting on there is contributing to your personal brand and then the brand of your team. So like always keeping that in mind.
If I could just do a service announcement for athletics, which is not exactly my job, but I'll do it anyway. The athletic department here is incredibly incredibly transparent with its student athletes policies and procedures. So if you go to goheels.com and you click on the compliance button, you can scroll down and you will get the University of North Carolina Athletic Department's social media policy. And so you can see exactly what the university requires or doesn't require, and every student athlete also has notice of what the university requirements are, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification too. I was saying I don't know the specific coaches' policies for particular teams necessarily, but we do have an athletic department policy that's more guidelines.
So those are guidelines that student athletes have to sign off on before they can start playing for UNC, correct?
Well, they don't necessarily sign the guidelines per se. They pledge their agreement to follow the student athlete code of conduct when they come here, and student athletes may confirm their choice to be part of the team. And so one of the ramifications of that is being a part of the team in the sense that you follow coaches' policies that they set.
And do those, you've probably read the guidelines and you know so much about law. Can you tell us if those guidelines are legal? Do they somehow violate the free speech and privacy rights of our college students here at UNC?
I can say unequivocally that they absolutely do not violate privacy rights or free speech rights. Schools have a really, really broad latitude to regulate the speech of students. As long as the school has a good reason and generally maintaining order and discipline in school, they can regulate the time, place, and manner. As Paul Pogge said, the athletics department has their general guidelines, and athletics departments have even more freedom through the courts to regulate student athletes, because participation in athletics is considered a privilege. And so you choose to participate in athletics. As a student athlete, there are additional benefits that you receive through your participation. And when you receive benefits, you can also have burdens like behavioral requirements or other restrictions. And the courts have been really, really lenient relative to how much schools can regulate you. They can regulate your, length of your hair, whether or not you can have facial hair, the type of clothing that you would wear, and so monitoring or regulating, social media use would be one of those things that's a little grayer because it's new, so you don't have case precedent that establishes, yes, very clearly you can do this, very clearly you can't do that. But if you look at the long line of cases relative to regulating athlete behavior, this probably would fall within one of those acceptable things. As far as UNC's policy, I actually really like our social media policy, because I think that it strikes, at least the first 2/3 of it, strikes a really good balance in educating student athletes about the choices that they make. That when you post something on Twitter or Facebook or on any other type of social media, that you are conveying a message to the world about, and that says something about you, but it also says something about your athletic team, your teammates, your program, your school, and that there are repercussions for those actions if you don't represent the school in a way that the school prefers to be represented. I said that I like about the first 2/3 of it because I think it is very educational, but when you get to the monitoring and consequences, I think that we get a little, I have a hard time personally with the NCAA's decision about UNC's culpability in not monitoring our athletes' social media accounts and therefore having greater sanctions for the violations that occurred within our program. because I don't think that it should be our job to be monitoring. It's actually a violation of Facebook's terms of service. So it's a violation for our student athletes to give their password and username to a third party to monitor. That violates Facebook's contract with you for your personal account.
Just to be clear, we do not require people to provide their passwords when they register. So that's important.
Good. Because other schools do, and that's definitely a violation of Facebook's term of use. And I also see that when third parties have access to student-athlete accounts, it's an opportunity for them to wreak all kinds of havoc and create all kinds of mischief. It's one thing if a student-athlete posts something that shows that they've clearly violated a rule or a law, and that they get punished for it. But it's another thing to be sabotaged by a third party who was able to access your information and then therefore posted all sorts of things that were not actually posted by you, and then you suffer the consequences for those things. I think it's also really, really scary territory as far as the university's liability if somebody posts something and your monitor, or you're the team monitor in UNC's case, and you see something that's posted and you don't report it. So say somebody's threatening somebody else, which is a violation of UNC's policy. But if somebody's threatening someone and then that person who's monitoring does not report that, does the university then have liability when that person goes ahead and acts on those kinds of threats? If at University of Virginia with student athletes involved in the murder situation, if any indicators have been posted about the volatility of that situation beforehand, and the university or some monitor or something knew about it and just sort of blew it off, what would the university's liability be? I think that those are huge legal implications that go way beyond, just, are you allowed to say 7 dirty words on your Facebook account?
I can offer something too. We don't assume a position where we are governing everything and assuming control of behavior. We have a third party that monitors for us, and they go in and they help us with that function. So hopefully we avoid those potential repercussions that you're saying.
Right, but what if your third party isn't reporting it back to you? Or
we've engaged their services, so we count on the third party to perform that.
In regards to that monitoring process, last year I had the opportunity to speak to Sam Carnahan, who's the CEO of Varsity Monitor. He broke down the process that they go through when they look at student athletes' Twitter and Facebook. And obviously there's a list of words and things that raise red flags, but once they compile that information, they send regular reports back to the athletic department, and information is distributed to the teams. What they do with it obviously is their choice, but that's how I understand the process to work.
When student athletes come here, to go into the details of how we engage Varsity Monitor, when student athletes come at the beginning of the year, they register their Facebook page and their Twitter account with Varsity Monitor. Where that monitors for a couple different things. They look for potential issues that we could have with NCAA rules specifically pertaining to amateurism and involvement with agents for obvious reasons. And the second one is behavior, conduct. It could be a violation of team policy.
You all could speak up just a little bit. It's a little hard to hear in the back. Thanks.
We'll try. So you mentioned earlier about UNC not requiring Facebook passwords from student athletes.
That's correct.
Do you require, well, there's a rumor that says that a student athlete is not allowed to say no to a friend request by an athletic department employee. Is that true?
I am not aware of any practice like that. It's certainly not our athletic department policy. That said, teams are free to set their own policies. The coaches can set a team policy that the student athletes on the team have to follow. And so, could a coach set a policy like that? Sure.
that be more of a legal problem, just forcing a student athlete to be friends with someone who could check up on what they post on social media?
No, friending someone, no. You're not getting into those issues about violating terms of service or anything else. And refusal to do so actually is definitely within that realm of what the courts have said is acceptable as far as coaches setting, team rules, team discipline, team standards. So, requiring it as part of your participation, if the coach demands that, I think the courts would actually enforce it.
Getting back to what Barbara said originally about being a part of a team here is a privilege. So adhering to that and following the team rules that your coach sets, if that's a rule that you accept a friend request from like an assistant coach who's going to help in the monitoring process, like varsity monitor or anything else, I don't think that's any sort of violation. It's just part of what's expected if you're going to have the privilege to be on a team.
If I could offer one bit of information for you, we want to clarify a perception of our stance on social media. We like social media. We think it's a very effective means of engaging with fans a lot of times. And so we use it in our marketing. But we also know that education is a key component of what we do. And so we work with our student athletes and we want to educate them that this is not a text message sent from one person to another, or is it an email sent from one person to another, or a one-on-one conversation. Anytime you post something online, it's 1 minute from going viral and being accessible to the entire world. And so people need to understand that there are potential ramifications to it.
And going off that, we just had our CREED meeting last night, which is the Leadership Academy for all the freshman student athletes who are required to be a part of it. And it's great. Last night we talked about social media and your personal brand and how everything you say, especially as an athlete on campus, it can be taken in the wrong way, or you have to be really careful about what you say. But also it's a great tool for establishing a positive personal brand. So say you're doing something awesome on campus, like in 2 weeks we have this turn and pink game for field hockey, and there's like a 5K that morning. It's a great way to get the positive messages out too. So I think something that we really do well at UNC is using those opportunities, like taking all the first years in, to educate them about how you can use social media in a positive way. So like you said, it's a great thing. It's basically it's your billboard. So you have to remember that it goes viral in like 30 seconds or less.
But isn't there a difference as far as First Amendment is concerned between a student athlete not posting something on social media because they feel privileged about being a student athlete here, and forbidding them to do it?
Right. I mean, there is a difference between those two things, because in the first instance, you're actually educating a student to make good choices. And in the second instance, there's really no education involved because you've just prohibited it. Both tactics are actually legal because, again, it goes to that time, place, and manner restriction. The other thing is that students have to remember that First Amendment and free speech doesn't mean that you can say whatever you want at any time for any reason, and that there are no repercussions for that. That there are, unless the purpose of your speech is something of public concern, it's not going to be protected by the Constitution. So if you're posting, complaints about your coach that are just, he doesn't understand what I'm doing, and he doesn't value my gifts, or he's not assessing me right, or I think he's a drunken idiot. If you post those kinds of things, it's okay for the coach to kick you off the team, because that's disrupting the orderly manner of, being able to maintain order and discipline on your team. If you were saying, I think my coach is sexist, racist, and these 6 examples of those things, well, guess what? Sexism, racism, issues of public concern. And so can you kick them off the team for those comments if they are in fact not defamatory and are real? No, those kinds of comments can be protected. But it's going to have to really rise to that level, and in what you guys read or post on Facebook or on Twitter, 99.9% of the time are not going to be comments that rise to the level of public concern.
Barbara, I think you bring up a very important point with some of these issues like harassment or sexism, things that we do not condone. There are avenues in place for our student athletes to raise those concerns. They can go to the Student Athlete Advisory Council. Every team has at least 2 sport administrators that they can communicate with. They can also go to any member of the athletic department, whether that be compliance all the way up the chain. So we want to hear our student athletes' concerns. We are here for the student athletes. Let's not have any mistake about that. Our intentions at the end of the day are to act in the best interest of the student athletes and further the institutional mission.
If the student athlete were to post this on Facebook or Twitter or anything online, probably means that they want to bring the issue to the public, and you, by monitoring them, you would not allow them to do that.
I'm not saying that you can't post your concern about sexism.
No, but also the athletics department policy doesn't prohibit the student athlete from going on and complaining about their coach or their teammates or anything else. But student athletes have to realize that there are, repercussions for those actions if it's determined that that's the sort of thing that creates a negative environment in the team or in some way prohibits the educational experience that you get through athletics.
We in no way want to advance a culture that covers things up or doesn't encourage communication. We have a lot of avenues that student athletes can pursue both inside and outside the athletic department to communicate if need be. And so we are here as advocates for the student athletes, and we encourage them to communicate problems that they might have.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what the third-party company monitors, like what they're looking for, the keywords that they're looking for?
Well, my understanding is that I've been here 2 months, so bear with me a little bit. But my understanding is that prior to my arrival, we asked them to list the words that Varsity Monitor looks for, and we would not give them that list. But that said, I think we can probably use our imagination to understand what might be on that list. We don't condone racial epithets or slurs or things of that nature. So you can imagine that things like that are probably on there.
As I understand that process to work, the majority of the things that Varsity Monitor reports would seem mundane, like photographs that don't meet the rules set within whatever parameters. I must say, we talk about looking for content that would spark controversy or be questionable, but you guys must be training these players very well because we don't see that very often. I wish we did.
Well,
Make my job easier.
I think that's an important comment. It reflects on this entire institution. This is one of the best universities in the entire country, and it attracts the best and brightest students. So we're proud to be here. As I said, athletics, if used appropriately, can be a very powerful complement to the scholastic efforts of our academic counterparts. So that's why we're here. That's how we view our role, and we're very privileged to be in a place like North Carolina where we don't have to deal with issues like that a lot, fortunately.
What are the social media networks that, because we've been talking about Twitter and Facebook, but there are a lot more out there. There's Tumblr, Instagram on cell phones, Pinterest lately has been going up. Do you also monitor those?
We don't. We monitor Facebook and Twitter right now, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm about 10 years behind everyone in the evolution of social media. I don't use Facebook, I don't use Twitter. But, so my vernacular isn't spot on. But we monitor Facebook and Twitter right now. I understand that that's an evolving industry, so if the need arises, or if we get some indication from the NCAA that that's something that we should be doing, then we'll react accordingly.
But the guidelines are valid for all social media.
Yeah, and we encourage our student athletes to do certain things, not just in social media, but anytime they're in front of a camera or giving an interview, really anytime they're holding themselves out as a representative of the university, which when you're a highly visible person, is quite often.
Brendan, can you tell us a little bit about how the Daily Tar Heel uses athletes' social media content to cover sports here?
Absolutely. First of all, I think student athletes that use Twitter can give not just us as journalists, but everyone, including their fans, some nice insight into what's going on behind the scenes, what we don't necessarily see. And obviously that information is not always in depth, but sometimes it can be entertaining. And we use Twitter specifically and Instagram on our blog. Once a week we post what's called store files. Some of you journalists and managers may be familiar with that. Of tweets from athletes that we find amusing or entertaining or have some value to our readers. And we do the same with Instagram on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So yeah, and we do that because it's a nice way to humanize the student athletes that you see on the field or in the classroom sometimes that you don't speak to, but you see them on Twitter and they're tweeting things that you can tweet. I think that's why we do that.
And how does it affect you when you, as the Daily Tar Heel editor, sports editor, when a coach suddenly forbids their athletes to tweet, which is what happened with Sylvia Hatchell, the coach of the women's basketball team, a few months ago during playoffs?
That's an interesting question. For the most part, the information that we gather does not come from Twitter. All of our reporting comes from talking to players and coaches firsthand. Now, we spoke to them last year about the ban. I know some of them were unhappy about it, but that's certainly Sylvia's right as a coach to impose that. It's disappointing to see that in a certain way their speech is limited, but I wasn't in the locker room, so I can't attest to what her reasoning would be behind that.
Just one last question, going back to, because I see you have an article here about California passing a law banning,
California actually just passed 2 laws related to social media. One prohibits employers from requiring either candidates for employment or current employees from providing their passwords and or account information. And the second statute prohibits post-secondary institutions from requiring or requesting social media account information. And that's for either existing or prospective students or from student groups. It also is very, very careful to state that the law does not apply to an educational institution's right to investigate or punish student misconduct. So even though the law says that a school can't require a student or a prospective student to provide that information, if they do happen upon information that violates your student code of conduct or any other myriad of rules that might be relevant or laws, they can still punish those students even though they're not required to hand over their information. Delaware is the only other state that has a post-secondary law that prohibits that from happening. 12 states prohibit employers from requiring it of their employees.
But if a law like this were to pass here in North Carolina, it seems like it wouldn't affect the UNC guidelines much because we're not doing that here.
Right, because you're not requiring those passwords, etc.
Megan, can you tell us a little bit more about your personal experience with social media, how you use them?
Yeah, I just got a Twitter last spring, so I'm like really into it now, but I'm not that witty, so I'm usually just a retweeter, and I usually like to follow like news outlets and games. It's much better. If any of you guys follow Game Tracker at all for games, Twitter is way better. And pretty much every team now has like a person dedicated to Twitter, so we're using it in like appropriate and good manners. And I think, personally on our team, my speech hasn't been restricted at all. I think if anything, it's been an education and a good thing because it's something like, as we're talking about for employers later on in life, like this is something that will affect you. Like Facebook and Twitter are representative of yourself, and it's something that can affect you down the line, and the education that UNC has provided, you know, through the Leadership Academy or through these teams, these regulations, it's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing. It's making you realize how you're perceived and, you know, the impact you have as a student athlete. So it's your personal brand, and you want it to be positive. So by just being made aware of it, especially coming in as a freshman, you realize, you know, the different guidelines, and I think of it in an extremely positive manner that I've had the educational experience with social media that I have, because it's not the kind of thing where you want to go apply for a job. I heard the other day in one of my classes, a law class, that one of my professor's daughters was going out for the Carolina Hurricane squad, and she and her best friend were going out, and her daughter made it to the 3rd round, and her best friend got cut, and they said, you know, we'd be happy to explain why to you. And so obviously she called and she's like, what's up? Like, I'm good. What's going on? And they said, you know, we weren't happy with your Facebook presence, and we're really sorry, but, you know, we'd love to, you know, we would have loved to have you, but, you know, that's not something we want representing us. So, you know, it's things that can affect your whole life and beyond college. So I think I haven't felt that inhibited by it. I think it's been a positive thing, and obviously, like I said earlier, that each team has different rules. Like, I know you're mentioning Instagram. I know that's like the craze right now. But I know there's certain teams that are like saying we're not going to use it all together. Other teams, it's, you know, the same thing with Facebook and Twitter. Just use it appropriately and think about what you're doing.
Do you feel like you have to think twice before posting something online, even more so than regular students or regular people?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe that's because I've been a part of this culture that has like been educating and like understanding like the power of it for good and knowing that it can be used for bad. I don't think I think twice in like a negative way about it. But
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think that the one thing that people have to realize is that student athletes, because of their athletic status, aren't just students, because for just students, people aren't all that interested in everything that you do every minute of the day. But if you're on the men's basketball team here, people are. And, you know, if sorry, I'm going to the bathroom becomes, you know, groundbreaking news. If a men's basketball player does it in a, you know, way that wouldn't be, you know, according to his regular schedule even. But you know, student athletes have to think twice, and I would encourage all of you to think at least twice, because there are repercussions down the road, whether that's you know, for employment opportunities or for membership with various organizations. You know, the image that you convey, it might be very, very cool to be, you know, like the biggest partier in your frat or sorority right now. You know, that might be your status symbol of achievement, but that is definitely not going to get you a job anytime soon.
I actually read online that some employers advise people to have 2 different accounts. Not on Facebook. They usually don't say that on Facebook because it is a violation of the Facebook terms, but on Twitter, for instance, have a private account and a public account and kind of juggle between the 2. How would you feel about this?
what's the purpose of it?
Well, say whatever you want, enjoy your First Amendment right on the private account and kind of self-regulate yourself on the public account would be the idea. So what happened to your, what is it, sister's friend?
No, but it was a teacher's.
Okay, teacher's
Yeah.
daughter's friend or something.
So she
would not have happened to you.
If I can be honest, I don't see a difference between the 2. Anytime you put something out there,
It's out
as I said, it's viral. And so the second I put a posting online, it's out in my community. And so if somebody can do something with that, who knows what's going to happen. So having a protected account versus a real public account or something of that nature, I don't see any distinguishing factor between the 2.
Is there a law that makes a distinction between the two?
No, absolutely not. And that's, I mean, there are all of those privacy settings, et cetera, that go along with all of those accounts. But the terms and conditions, how many of you have actually read more than the first 3 words of any term and condition of anything that you clicked I agree to? How many did you read? 5? The first line, and then I went, I agree, right? Or I had to read 3 more words when I scrolled down. Yeah, I mean, you guys don't read what you agree to, and what you agree to is that they can change their rules at any time, and that they can use that information for a myriad of purposes, and unless you opt out intentionally, they can change those rules at any time. And so things that you might post there thinking that, oh, I have really good security and only these people are going to be able to see it, well, when that person sees it and decides to share it and everything else, you know, you don't have any privacy. You have to consider that as public information all the time.
And not just for student athletes, for everyone.
For everybody, exactly. I mean, if you're concerned at all about what people might think, or your ability to get a job, or, you know, if your potential spouse's parents do a background check on you, or, you know, anything else. I mean, the moment you put it out there, this is out there in the world, and it may affect your life. Would it? Spoken like a true mom, right?
But, it's easy nowadays to record someone, video or audio, right? And if there's a student athlete, like a men's basketball student athlete who, I mean, everyone knows who they are here on campus. If someone were to record them saying something, they didn't post it on social media, but someone recorded them saying something, and those people who recorded them would post it on social media. That can cause exactly the same problem as the athlete saying it on social media, except they would have said it orally, right?
You're right.
How would you deal with that?
Well, I think you underscore the importance of educating them. So our student athletes need to understand that they're highly visible people, especially here in a community this size. But also when you come to a place like North Carolina, people know who you are throughout the country. So you're expected to conduct yourself in a way that reflects positively on you.
And I'm just curious, with the social media monitoring, are they likely to pick up on those things that others post, or are they just monitoring the athletes' accounts?
Again, my understanding.
Yeah, I'm totally curious.
They'll pick up things on your Facebook page.
Right.
And then things that are entered into the public domain through your Twitter account. So when you tweet from one person directly to another without that being in public, one that will not be picked up. But a tweet that you put out to the entire world will be picked up. So it's basically, I don't think it's anything really earth-shattering. It's us making sure that we know what the rest of the world knows. So
it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the difference between educating someone to not do something and forbidding them to do something. Absolutely. And I take it that's why the athletics department does not want to prohibit social media use.
Right. I mean, you could read our policy. We allow social media usage as a departmental policy. But we say that you need to be very cognizant of what you're putting in the public realm, because you're representing yourself, you're representing your team, you're representing the university, whether you like it or not.
I think at this point we're going to open up to questions. Dr. Pete?
First of all, I follow John Henson's tweets, but I never know what he's talking about. I tweet with complete sentences with proper punctuation, so you always know what I say, but you know, when you get into tweet speak, I never know what it is anyway, so I know you don't worry about him anymore. But,
well, I think you bring up an important point, because student athletes need to understand that what may be part of their common vernacular isn't necessarily well known by the rest of the world, and it can also be offensive to the rest of the world. So we work with them as part of that educational component, that if you use a certain word that may be common speak for you, others could find that offensive. So just consider the ramifications of doing something like that.
I think, also I'd like to say, I think there's 2 different images of student athletes that, you know, one that's in my head and then the one that you all talk about. You know, I sort of have this image, and based in my studies of the First Amendment, of some young person who wants to engage in political and social debate and, you know, speak freely about a lot of edgy topics. And then I hear about athletes who are trying to build their personal brand. So when did that start? You know, like, I get that. Like, Megan, when you talk about that, you know, you're being really careful. So about building a personal brand, which is not a bad thing. I don't mean to say that it's a bad thing, but when did that start with young athletes? That that's what their goal is for using social media?
That doesn't have, I don't mean that to necessarily be the goal. I think it's just the education that I've gotten here is that to use social media for good. But that's something that I think I would do regardless. Like, it's like representation of yourself, you know, it's your billboard. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but I guess I'm conservative in general, so maybe that's just the nature of.
Answer this question about this. The first time I encountered Jonathan Jones, who used to be a reporter for the Daily Tar Heel, had his own T-shirt, you know, built his brand as a journalist. So that was new to me. But I thought it was silly that it worked for him.
Well, actually, I mean, your question is interesting. I read an article the other day about generational differences, and in the summer reading book about how the internet has changed, you know, not only how we live, but our actual brains, etc. And your generation and younger, and maybe a few years older than you, I think maybe because there is so much ability to communicate so broadly that whole, you know, this is my image, this is my brand thing, an overwhelming majority, something like 85% of high school seniors, their goal is to be famous. And you can be famous in a lot of ways, and most of them are not good. But the goal is to be famous, not to cure cancer or to, you know, be a good person or to do a lot of other things. But that I want to, you know, make my mark, show my identity kind of thing is definitely internet media generational thing.
I think this idea of branding, which is funny, is also something we heard Harrison Barnes say last year a lot. He wanted to improve his own personal brand. To me, it seems very reactionary to, you know, how Twitter exposed some of the, you know, not so beautiful things about North Carolina athletics a couple of years ago with Marvin Austin. And obviously, the educational process, it has shown student athletes here specifically ways to engage an audience on Twitter and be conversational and encourage that sort of interaction with fans in a positive way that improves your brand but avoids the repercussions that are not only personal but in that instance.
I would slightly disagree with that because Harrison Barnes was promoting his personal brand as a high school student. If you sort of follow the, you know, the Google of his history, so that whole, you know, branding is not just about what we represent here at North Carolina. Branding is professional athletes' individual brands, or, you know, leagues, brands, etc. People are trying to establish their own unique identity and mark, and it's branding.
Professor Sweet?
Just curious, are any other student organizations monitored by outside organizations for their social media use? Student government, is the Tar Heel, is the theater department, actors? Anybody else? Do you know?
Is that a question for me?
Whoever.
I'm not aware of it.
As far as I know, no one's monitored on Twitter. I mean, you can feel free to.
Just curious, just to follow up, what is it about athletics that makes this needed, okay, just to hear you articulate sort of why it's okay for athletics to have these kind of filters when everybody else can be as provocative as they want to be?
Well, student athletes are fundamentally different than the regular student. The student athletes, as I said, especially here in North Carolina, are nationally visible in some cases. So we have an obligation, I think, as part of our education efforts with those student athletes to help them understand that there are proper ways to use social media. And I think when you get into looking at the feasibility of one person or two people in the athletic department monitoring every single account, it becomes somewhat of a problem to do it effectively. So this third party can be a significant asset, I think, for us in helping further those educational efforts.
I absolutely agree that the student athletes are different. I think I said that earlier on, but I mean, quite honestly, you can look at what the fundamental difference is. In my first year seminar today, we talked about it. How many of you are actively concerned or care about what the writers on the Daily Tar Heel think about anything? Are you a DTH writer?
No, I don't have that.
Okay. So, but how many of you actively think about or care about what football players or basketball players or other athletes on this campus think or do on a regular basis? Not so much. Some of you, none of you are willing to admit it right now. Yeah, but right. I mean, it's because 85% of Americans consider themselves fanatic. Not just sports fans, but fanatic, that they are passionate about sports, that makes them a bigger target. And the other thing relative that we haven't mentioned is that there are people who will follow athletes intentionally to try to see what they can trip them up with, and then there's the whole underground of gambling.
People at NC State.
Yeah, that would be them too, or Dan Kane. Not to mention anybody specifically, right? But, you know, people who are involved in gambling and, you know, are maybe following athletes' tweets to see if they say, well, somebody was out all night last night, so, oh, gee, we're going to change the spread here, or we're going to do this. I mean, there are people who are intentionally, you know, following athletes for evil, which makes them different than the other students.
I would just say from my perspective that the easy answer is damage control. When you have student athletes who are, to a certain portion of the population, the face or the only representation of this university, then you want to be, as an organization, on top of them, making sure they're not making mistakes that would, you know, hurt your brand.
I would agree to the extent that it's educational and helping not only protect the university, which is a central part of what we do, but also acting in furtherance of student athletes' interests, because it is, I guess, as you raise the damage control down the road for that student athlete, because you're putting something out there that could jeopardize a future job interview or something of that nature.
What about Olympic sports, though? Because you mentioned football, basketball, and we can all agree that football and basketball are bigger than other sports, and some of our Olympic sports are extremely popular, like women's soccer, but others, not so much. What makes those athletes more, what makes their tweets more important than those of an actor, like Professor Sweeney mentioned?
I don't distinguish between one sport or another, first off. I think we're committed to equitable athletics here in North Carolina, and so we see the importance of all sports. But specifically, as you asked, the individual tweets of an Olympic sports athlete, we do have some very visible Olympic sports athletes. We had some participants in the Olympics recently, so I don't think it would be appropriate to distinguish between the two. We need to be aware of all of them, and we're not just here to educate and act on behalf of our football players and basketball players. We have a lot of varsity sports here, and we are committed to acting on behalf of all student athletes.
Dr. P?
So nobody talks about money. Is that part of the difference between student athletes and other people? It's just the amount of revenue that football and basketball bring in and not wanting to jeopardize that?
But I think if we're talking specifically about money attributable to individual programs, I think it's certainly outside the scope of this panel discussion, but I will say that, yes, there are obvious revenue components to different sports. When we budget, and certain sports bring in more ticket revenue than others, but that in no way plays any part in our decision to monitor and help
frowned, and I was trying to think about how that would really make a difference. And I actually kind of look at it from the money the other way, that, you know, that the university and the athletics department invests so much in the student athletes that, you know, having an expectation that they should, you know, behave in a certain way is reasonable based on how much benefit they get from their athletic participation. So if the money factors, I would kind of look at it from that side.
You know, we always talk about the quote, "To whom much is given, much is expected." So I think this falls within the realm of that.
Another question? Danielle?
I have a question. You were saying that it's a time, place, and manner restriction that UNC is putting on student athletes, but I see it more as like a content-based restriction, because like the monitor looks at what is written on social media sites and decides whether or not that should be taken down or not.
I don't know that they're actually deciding what should be taken down. I think that...
What specifically is a restriction?
Well, I just have an example. I had a teammate actually that had something about "I hate college" on Facebook, and that had to be taken down. How isn't that kind of gray area? It's totally based on what is written.
Well, I would still call it a time, place, and manner restriction, because basically they're not saying you can't walk around campus or stand on your soapbox or do anything else and say, "I hate college." They're saying that you can't put that message on a particular social media site. So I don't see it as a content restriction as much as it is. And again, "I hate college" is not a matter of public concern. It's not going to be protected by the Constitution. So if they want you to take it down as punishment, that seems like a very reasonable punishment for that type of statement. Is it?
Well, and understand too that that's a representation, whichever student athlete put that out there, that's a representation of the team for the playoff. And that was an affirmative choice that they made to be a part of that team, as I said. So there are certain things that come with that. And if the coach decides that that's not representing their team well or a violation of team policies or standards of conduct, we stand behind our coaches. Now, if it's that big of a deal that the student athlete feels the need to raise a concern, they can go through some of those avenues I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
I have to, just to follow up on that, again, why is it that athletes are more scrutinized with things like that, where if somebody like me put "I hate college" on my Facebook, nobody's knocking at my door or sending me a text message. If you're a student first and an athlete second, which is what every college in America stresses for student athletes, you're not an athlete that just happens to go to school. You're a student athlete, you should represent yourself. You know, I'm not just thinking about, if I put that up there, nobody would come to me and say, "Hey, you need to take that down." But
Right.
if the backup goalie for the soccer team put that up there, somebody would be calling him and saying, "Hey, look, you can't do something like that."
Well, the backup goalie is the same as the starting goalie. They're a student athlete. And you're a student as opposed to a student athlete. Student athletes are subject to a higher level of scrutiny. And that can be a function of society, that can be a whole different conversation. But athletes, as we discussed, are out there in the public realm. They're recognized in town, whereas the typical student may not. Athletes, just by their nature, are highly visible people a lot of times. So they are subject to a different level of scrutiny. That's why we allocate the efforts, time, and resources to help educate them specifically on what's appropriate to put out there, what's in their best interest.
From a legal perspective, it's one of the burdens that is totally acceptable based on the privilege.
Yes.
I'm just curious, if anyone knows, is the student body president monitored on Facebook? Because they're known in the community, and probably more so than a lot of the student athletes.
How many of you can name the name of the student body president? Oh, good. It's way better than I expected.
How many of you know the backup goalie for the soccer team?
Okay.
That's fine.
That's okay though.
That's fine. And the student athlete, or the student body president certainly is not a survey of athletics, so I think I would miss to comment on something of that nature. But as representative of the athletics department, we want to act in the best interest of our student athletes. And so we're going to do that with our student athletes. Whoever the student body president reports to, that's an autonomous decision that they make.
Professor Sweeney.
If an individual coach just decides, I've had enough, and I want to take a hard line, and I want to shut down social media for my team, what I perceive to be the good of the team, are you going to push me back?
Well, we stand behind our coaches. Again, we are there to support our student athletes and coaches.
So if I wanted to take a no Facebook, no Twitter, no Instagram, you stand behind me?
The student athletes are making an affirmative choice to be on that team. And so it is their prerogative to join that team. I'm not making you come to the University of North Carolina. I'm not making you play for that team. That's a choice that you make of your own mission. And understand that certain things come with that. For instance, if I'm a football player, I can't show up to Saturday's game against Virginia Tech because they're wearing a green jersey on Saturday. It's not going to fly. There are certain limitations on what you can do when you're a student athlete, and you agree to follow those limitations and certain standards of conduct when you join a team.
I just still don't understand how you guys can consider it a content neutral regulation, because it is, regulating certain things only. It doesn't mean that they can't post on Twitter altogether, they can't post on Facebook altogether. It's regulating the content that they post. So I don't understand how that can
I'm not telling you
content
can't
neutral regulation.
put the post out there. I'm just telling you there's going to be consequences. If you do it, you need to understand those consequences.
But why would the consequence be taking it down?
Well, again, it's an educational piece. And so having something out there that represents you, represents the team, represents the university, there are consequences to that. And so if the coach determines that it's in the poorer interest of the team to have something like that out there, then I'll certainly support that.
It's not mandatory for them to take it down. They can choose to take it down. They can, correct?
Right.
Like, that's the choice.
Yeah.
Sure.
Tough choice. But honestly,
But, yeah.
what would you suggest as the alternative? Sorry to follow
I
up,
mean,
but
I understand the policy. I just don't believe that you guys consider it a content. It's not considered a content neutral.
The law considers it content neutral because nothing prohibits them from posting whatever they want to post. Just like nothing prohibits you guys from saying whatever you want to say or posting whatever you want to post. It's just that the law says it's okay for there to be consequences for the things that you say. It's not regulating the content. It doesn't prohibit content. And it is strictly time, place, and manner. It says if a coach shuts down your social media entirely, you're not allowed to use any kind of social media. I think personally, it would be silly to do that because you're just inviting people to break your rules. But if they chose to do that, there's nothing that prohibits that student athlete from sharing that content in any other way other than social media. Write letters to the editor, do whatever else.
Do student athletes have the option of, creating a social media account but not presenting themselves as a student athlete of UNC? If they don't put their real name out there,
That's a violation of the terms and conditions.
of Facebook, but not necessarily the others.
Right.
But I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Well, how would the athletic department react to a student athlete being out there online but not presenting themselves as a student athlete? Because that would not threaten the image of UNC in any way, right?
When a student athlete puts himself out there, you can't just delineate between the two and say, well, today I'm not a representative of North Carolina. It doesn't work. That's not a fact. When you put yourself out there and you're a student athlete of North Carolina. I'm an employee of this. When I do something on Saturday outside of the office, I'm still an employee employee or employees.
But no one knows who they would be. No one would know who they are.
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily at all. No, when, as we discussed, student athletes are highly visible, and so a lot of people do know who they are. So when they put themselves out there, you need to understand you can't make this distinction between the two. And you can't separate an online identity with what you really are. You are who you are. You're
A lot of people do
that.
A lot of people have an online identity and a real life identity. You know, they have a like a pseudonym. Is that how you say it? And they don't necessarily have to say, I'm a student athlete at the University of North Carolina. If they're on Tumblr, for instance, which I know you're not monitoring, but they can just like, you know, call themselves, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered it because I know a lot of people on Twitter, they'll get jobs and then they'll have their Twitter and say, the views that I express on Twitter are not of the company that I work for. So I just wanted to know like how that would apply to like student athletes. Like, well, this doesn't really represent what UNC athletics thinks about like being in college or something like that. So
I think that would be very nice in practice to be able to draw that line, but just simply saying that what I'm saying right now doesn't represent something else. It's a very hard line to draw. And I think a lot of people, whether you try to draw that line or not, a lot of people might not care.
I have a question about like where the money is coming from to pay for all of this like regulation. Like, is it just revenues from games or like athletic fees? Where's it coming from?
You mean the money to,
Like for Varsity Monitor or whatever it takes to.
it comes out of the athletic department budget.
I was wondering. I don't want to be.
Well, FYI for anyone out there that does want to check and see their own like accounts that are monitored through UCS, there's like it's called SocioClean, and you can do the exact same thing as basically what Varsity Monitor does, and it'll give you a grade for whatever your accounts are. And that's been recommended to me in a lot of classes, like for all students. It's something I would recommend everyone do it before applying for jobs or internships or anything. I think it's a helpful tool.
Another question? Well, I guess we're just going to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any other questions, I'm sure you can just come here and ask them individually. Thank you for coming and have a happy First Amendment Day.